Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rob.
Roger Bannister in 1954 was the first person to break the 4-minute mile. He ran a mile in 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. Up until that time, it was thought that physically the human body is incapable of breaking the 4-minute mile record. But once he broke it, many others were able to do the same thing suddenly. And the question is why? Why up until 1954 no one could do it, and suddenly after he did it, many others did it? And the answer is that sometimes there are psychological barriers, not just physical. If you believe something's not possible, you don't accomplish it. But once he demonstrated that it could be done, many others followed suit. This is partially at the story of the splitting of the sea. And our rabbis tell us that just like when you look at the sea, you only see the surface, but there's so much more depth beyond the surface. So too, every person has their conscious awareness, but the subconscious, which is what Freud called it, but we call it the neshama, has infinite more potential than we can see on the surface. And therefore, just like the splitting of the sea was the greatest event in the freedom of the Jewish people, the key to the freedom of every human being is to split their own personal sea, which means to uncover what lies beneath their surface. And no one taught this idea more than the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who today on Yud Shvat is the anniversary of the day that the Rebbe took on the mantle of leadership of the Chabad movement in 1951. The Rebbe's message was, don't look at a Jew superficially. Always realize that there's an entire sea of spirituality, of holiness, of godliness within every Jew. And what you have to do is split the sea and reveal their godly soul, and then you will see their infinite potential. And that's why the Rebbe chose many mitzvahs to promote, but everyone knows Chabad is synonymous with putting on tefillin with Jews, which is actually a mitzvah that emerges from this week's Torah portion and last week's, the Exodus from Egypt. When you look at the mitzvah of putting on tefillin, the Torah says bind it on your hand and then on your head. Why? Because first you have to have action, and then the action will lead to more knowledge, wisdom, and self-discovery. Sometimes people think I have to learn, understand, and when I fully get it, I'll start doing the good deed. And the Torah says, no, put on your hand tefillin first. First you start with action, and then it will lead to the head tefillin, to comprehension and understanding of God. And so therefore, the way to split your sea is by doing a mitzvah. Every mitzvah puts a crack in your sea and reveals your own greatness and your own potential. There's a story told about Rabbi Abraham Korf. He was the first Chabad rabbi to come to the state of Florida back in the 60s. And it came to a spring break, and he was a Russian Jew. He came here, a Hasidic Jew, to spread Yiddishkeit. And someone told him that thousands and thousands of college kids come to Florida for spring break. He said, great, what an opportunity to put on tefillin with Jews. So he heard that they're all hanging out at the fairground. So he set up a tefillin booth, and he was trying to get people to put on tefillin. Unfortunately, most college kids don't come to Florida on spring break to put on tefillin with a rabbi with a white beard, or maybe his beard was black at the time. And he wasn't getting a lot of customers. Now, you know, in the 60s, drugs was the big rage. So he came up with an idea. He put up a big sign, free pot and LSD. Suddenly, students started flocking. They said, where's the free pot and LSD? He said, free pot, put on tefillin, and LSD, let's start davening. So sometimes the animal soul, the superficial part of man, is running after the drugs or the physical pleasures or enjoyments of life. But when you split your sea, you realize that what your neshama really wants is not more physical pleasure, but the spiritual pleasure of putting on tefillin, of davening, of doing mitzvahs. And the splitting of the sea reminds us that if you want to go truly free as a human being, you can't do that by only accessing your conscious, superficial surface level of identity, but you have to pierce the depths of your sea and reveal everything that God implanted within your godly soul.